Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Today is April 1st, 2026. And right now, in the humidity down in Florida, 4 humans are strapping into a capsule.
Yeah, getting ready to ride a controlled explosion back to the moon.
Exactly. I mean, they're the vanguard of this massive, multi-trillion-dollar commercial space industry. It's fundamentally redefining our whole relationship with the cosmos.
It really is. And this is the crazy part, if you look just half a world away, the picture is terrifyingly different.
Yeah.
We've got a 33-day war in the Middle East that's threatening to choke off the global oil supply. It could rewrite international borders and potentially even trigger a regional nuclear arms race.
It's just a wildly fractured diagnostic landscape of humanity today.
Yeah.
We are a species capable of navigating the vacuum of deep space, right?
Right.
But at the same exact time, we are actively tearing ourselves apart down here on the ground.
The contrast is just staggering. And frankly, it requires us to look at all these events not as isolated news items, but as this deeply interconnected web.
Because it's all connected, right?
Exactly. Because the same technology propelling us to the lunar surface, it's born from the same human engine, that same drive for resources and supremacy that's fueling the geopolitical tremors in the Middle East.
And that is exactly our mission for you today. We are going to unpack this groundbreaking, chaotic moment in history. We'll be looking at the cutting-edge science redefining the universe, the microtechnology actively altering our biology, and the international diplomacy that is just hanging by a thread right now.
It's a lot to cover.
It is a massive deep dive. But to understand where humanity is headed, we actually need to start by looking up. So let's look at the launch pad, the Artemis II mission.
It's such a monumental day for NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. I mean, we are talking about the first crewed lunar flight since Apollo 17.
Which is 1972, right?
Yeah, 1972. And Commander Reed Wiseman is leading a crew of 4 into lunar orbit. But it's vital to understand the engineering distinction here.
Because they aren't landing.
Right, exactly. This is not a landing mission. It's a 10-day translunar journey designed to push the Orion spacecraft to its absolute limits.
So they're testing the hardware.
Testing the advanced environmental control and life support systems in the actual harsh reality of deep space. They have to prove we have the architectural foundation to eventually reach Mars.
What really fascinates me about this, beyond the billions of dollars of titanium and propulsion systems, is the psychological aspect.
Oh, the zero gravity indicator.
It's the crew's zero gravity indicator. So this is the object they let float around the cabin to visually confirm they've hit microgravity. And for this mission, it's just this adorable little plush mascot named Rise.
Aha, yeah.
It's just such a grounding human detail in the middle of this incredibly cold mathematical endeavor.
It really is. It injects this necessary human warmth into a highly sterile environment, and that human connection extends far beyond the capsule today.
Yeah, the citizen science stuff.
Right. Today's coverage is highlighting this incredible citizen science initiative involving unistellar smart telescopes. People in their own backyards are turning their lenses to the sky to actively track the Artemis II rocket.
I was reading about this. They are tracking the light curve, right?
Exactly.
So as the rocket ascends and travels, sunlight reflects off its hull. And a light curve is basically just a graph measuring the intensity of those reflected photons over time.
You nailed it. And by tracking those tiny fluctuations, everyday people are validating the spacecraft's trajectory and rotation.
That is so cool.
Yeah, they aren't just passively watching. They are actively generating mission data. It totally democratizes space exploration.
But while the public is looking on with all this optimism, the crew themselves are facing a deeply hostile environment because the reports today are focusing heavily on a very specific, terrifying variable: space weather.
Right, specifically the threat of solar storms.
And when we say solar storm, we aren't talking about wind and rain out there.
No, not at all. We are talking about coronal mass ejections.
The sun essentially just belching out massive clouds of charged particles, like plasma and magnetic fields traveling at millions of miles per hour.
Yeah. Here on Earth, our magnetosphere catches most of it, which is why we get the beautiful northern lights.
Right.
But out in the void between the Earth and the moon, that radiation would just tear straight through human DNA. It is one of the most significant barriers to deep space colonization.
Because it makes you sick.
Extremely sick. High-energy protons can cause acute radiation sickness, severely damage the central nervous system, and even permanently degrade the spacecraft's avionics.
Wow.
That is why the Orion capsule has a specialized built-in radiation shelter.
Wait, how does a radiation shelter work inside a spaceship?
So if the sensors detect a solar flare, the astronauts have to physically relocate to a reinforced central hub. And then they pack their own high-density supplies. We're talking water tanks, food rations, equipment bags. They pack it all around themselves to absorb the incoming radiation.
That's intense, like building a fort out of your own water supply.
Yeah, it's a sobering reminder that space actively wants to kill us.
Which makes the sheer volume of money pouring into space exploration even more wild to me.
Right.
Because while NASA is taking this very slow, measured, scientifically rigorous approach, the commercial sector is just exploding.
Oh, totally.
Let's talk about Elon Musk and SpaceX, because the financial reports today are dominated by something called Project Apex.
Project Apex is the internal designation for an unprecedented SpaceX initial public offering, an IPO.
And the numbers are staggering.
Beyond staggering. They have assembled an underwriting syndicate of 21 major global banks.
Yeah.
And the target valuation they are looking at is $1.75 trillion.
Trillion, with a T.
Yeah.
That makes it one of the most valuable entities in human history. How do you even justify a number like that?
Well, the market is pricing in the absolute disruption of orbital economics. They are looking at the heavy lift capabilities of the Starship program, plus the revenue generation of global satellite internet like Starlink. They believe SpaceX isn't just a transport company anymore. It is the foundational infrastructure for a multi-planetary economy.
And this is a massive, but there's an incredibly dangerous blind spot here.
Yeah.
Juxtaposed right against that trillion-dollar valuation is a photograph that dropped in the news today.
The Starlink image?
Yes. It shows a SpaceX Starlink satellite, one of the thousands, currently in low Earth orbit, literally breaking apart and disintegrating in the vacuum of space.
And that single image perfectly encapsulates the growing crisis of space debris. It's often referred to as Kessler syndrome.
Okay, break that down for me. Kessler syndrome.
So when a satellite disintegrates, whether through a micrometeorite impact or just a catastrophic internal failure, it doesn't just fall down to Earth immediately.
Right.
It shatters into thousands of pieces of shrapnel. And all that shrapnel maintains orbital velocity, which is roughly 17,500 miles per hour.
Let me just put that speed into perspective for you. If low Earth orbit is a newly built, highly profitable superhighway, a Starlink breaking apart is like a semi-truck losing its cargo of steel pipes at 17,000 miles per hour.
Yeah, that's a good way to picture it.
And there are absolutely no street sweepers. Everything else on that highway, weather satellites, GPS infrastructure, the International Space Station, is now just dodging invisible bullets.
That is the exact mechanical reality. I mean, a piece of aluminum the size of a paint fleck traveling at those speeds carries the kinetic energy of a bowling ball moving at 100 miles an hour.
A paint fleck.
A paint fleck. It will punch a hole straight through a solar panel or a pressurized module. And the terrifying part of Kessler syndrome is the ablation cascade.
The cascade, right?
Yeah. One collision creates a debris field, which then strikes two more satellites, creating larger debris fields until low Earth orbit becomes an impassable, impenetrable cloud of high-speed trash.
Which raises an enormous ethical and economic question. How can Wall Street value a company at almost $2 trillion when the physical shared environment they operate in is rapidly becoming a hazardous landfill?
It's a great question.
It feels like we are just taking our worst terrestrial habits, industrial pollution without consequence, and exporting them directly into the cosmos.
It is a classic failure of pricing in negative externalities. The financial markets value the technological capability, but the international regulatory frameworks for space traffic management are decades behind.
Because nobody owns space.
Exactly. No single nation owns orbit, which means no single nation has the authority to police it.
It is a phenomenal paradox. But while our immediate orbit is turning into a modern junkyard, our deep space probes are quietly doing the exact opposite. They are reaching out to the most ancient, pristine environments in the solar system to understand our origins.
Yeah, the asteroid data today is incredible.
Let's look at the data coming back from asteroid Bennu. NASA's OSIRIS-REx mission spent years traveling to Bennu, mapped it, touched the surface to collect samples, and successfully brought them back to Earth.
And the initial analysis of those rocks is revealing what scientists are calling a hidden chemical patchwork.
The specifics of that patchwork are just mind-bending because they found evidence of water alteration.
Right, but we should clarify, water in space doesn't mean a liquid puddle on a rock.
Sure.
It means that hydrated minerals, like phyllosilicates, are present. For those to form, liquid water had to interact with the rock at some point in its deep history.
But even more incredible than that, they found that delicate organic molecules have actually survived.
And the survival of those organic molecules, specifically complex carbon chains and amino acids, that is the holy grail of astrobiology.
Because Bennu is essentially a time capsule.
Right. Exactly. It's from the formation of the solar system 4.5 billion years ago. The fact that these fragile building blocks of life could survive the extreme thermal cycling, the hard vacuum, and the constant bombardment of cosmic radiation implies something profound.
It changes the whole narrative.
It suggests that the chemical prerequisites for life are not these unique fragile anomalies isolated to Earth. They are robust, widespread, and deeply embedded in the mechanics of the universe.
It lends massive weight to the panspermia theory, the idea that the ingredients for life were delivered to early Earth by these exact types of rocky impacts.
Absolutely.
And speaking of massive dynamic systems in our cosmic neighborhood, we also have new data regarding Saturn today.
From the Cassini spacecraft.
Right. Long after its mission ended, it continues to provide data that just baffles astronomers. The reports indicate that Saturn's magnetic field is curiously warped and lopsided.
Which completely challenges our foundational models of planetary physics.
How so?
Well, gas giants generate their magnetic fields through a dynamo effect, essentially churning oceans of liquid metallic hydrogen deep within their cores. Usually, this creates a relatively symmetrical dipole magnetic field.
Like a standard magnet.
Right, but the Cassini telemetry shows this distinct asymmetry, and the prevailing hypothesis now is that this warping is the result of incredibly complex interactions with one of Saturn's many moons. Perhaps Enceladus or Titan.
So the gravitational pull, or maybe the plasma trails emitted by a moon, are literally dragging and distorting the magnetic shield of a gas giant.
Precisely. It demonstrates that a planetary system is not just a massive body with smaller rocks passively orbiting it. It is a highly interactive, fluid electromagnetic ecosystem.
I love that concept, a highly interactive ecosystem, because that perfectly transitions us from deep space back down to Earth. We see that same resilience, that same complex interactivity happening in biology.
Oh, the same in study.
Yes. Today's coverage highlighted a biological study that completely broke my brain. Scientists opened up cans of salmon that were caught and packaged 40 years ago, back in the 1980s.
It's a field called historical ecology. It is a brilliant, totally unorthodox methodology.
It really is.
Yeah.
So they analyzed this 40-year-old canned salmon, and they find an increase in parasitic worms, specifically in nematodes.
Sounds gross, I know.
My immediate reaction was pure revulsion. If I hear there is an increase in parasites in fish, I assume the ocean is sick. But the ecologists are stating this is actually an indicator of a thriving, recovering marine environment.
Right.
Walk me through the mechanics of that, because it sounds completely backwards.
It does sound backwards, but it requires looking at the food web from the perspective of the parasite. An anisakkid nematode has an incredibly precarious, complex life cycle.
Okay.
It cannot simply reproduce inside a salmon. It requires multiple specific hosts to reach maturity. The eggs hatch in the open ocean and are consumed by tiny crustaceans like krill.
Okay, so the krill eat the eggs.
Yeah. The krill is then eaten by a fish, like the salmon. But the nematode still isn't an adult. The salmon must then be eaten by a marine mammal, a seal, a dolphin, or a whale.
Wow.
Only inside the gut of that apex marine mammal can the nematode reproduce and release eggs back into the water to start the cycle over.
Okay, I see where this is going. If any single link in that chain breaks, the parasite goes extinct locally.
Exactly. If the ocean is heavily polluted and the krill die off, the nematode vanishes. If overfishing decimates the salmon population, the nematode vanishes. If marine mammals are hunted to the brink, the nematode vanishes.
So it's a proxy.
Therefore, finding an increase in these specific nematodes over a 40-year period provides empirical proof that the entire trophic pyramid from the microscopic crustaceans all the way up to the apex predators is intact, robust, and capable of supporting complex biological networks.
The parasite is the ultimate proxy for a healthy, functioning ecosystem.
Yeah.
That is just brilliant. Your nature uses the most counterintuitive metrics sometimes.
It really does.
And this theme of life, Finding a way to endure extreme pressure isn't just modern history. Genomic research published today looked at squids and cuttlefish.
Going way back in time.
Way back. During the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event, the massive asteroid impact that wiped out the dinosaurs 66 million years ago, the surface of the oceans became a toxic, acidified nightmare. But these cephalopods survived.
The genomic timeline shows they initiated a massive evolutionary migration.
Where did they go?
They retreated into the deep oxygen minimum zones of the ocean. They adapted their metabolisms to survive in near-freezing, low-oxygen environments. They essentially just waited out the global cataclysm occurring above them.
It is a masterclass in niche adaptation.
Totally.
And while the squids were hiding in the deep, the dinosaurs were obviously meeting their end. But scientists in South Korea just uncovered a fascinating piece of that lost world. Using micro-CT scans, they found a baby dinosaur hidden entirely inside a solid block of rock
named Dulisaurus humani. The technology used here is just as fascinating as the discovery itself. Microcomputed tomography allows paleontologists to bombard a solid rock with high-resolution X-rays. They build a perfect 3D model of the fossil inside without ever swinging a hammer.
So they don't even have to break the rock.
Right, they can virtually peel away the rock matrix on a computer. And what they found inside this baby Dulisaurus were gastroliths.
Stomach stones, right. Because this was an herbivore, but it didn't have the complex molars required to grind up tough plant matter.
Exactly.
So it swallowed rocks.
Yeah.
The muscular action of the stomach would churn the rocks against the vegetation, mechanically digesting the food. It's such an elegant, brute force biological solution.
Whether it is the nematode relying on a seal, a cuttlefish altering its metabolism, or a dinosaur swallowing rocks to digest its dinner, life is constantly engineering solutions to survive its environment.
Which brings us to human engineering. Because long before we were launching rockets, ancient humans were doing incredible ecological engineering of their own.
The Fiji story.
Yes. Archaeologists working in the Fiji archipelago have uncovered an entire island built roughly 1,200 years ago. And it isn't volcanic rock. It was built entirely by a local culture out of discarded seashells.
It forces us to rethink the whole timeline of the Anthropocene, the epoch where human activity dominates the environment.
Right.
Because this wasn't just a random trash heap. This was deliberate, sustainable, niche construction.
How does that work?
Well, calcium carbonate from seashells is incredibly durable. By accumulating their waste in specific coastal zones, they altered the tidal hydrology, stabilized the shoreline, and actually created a permanent, habitable landmass.
They turned their refuse into their foundation.
They really did.
It is a profound monument to ancient ingenuity. They manipulated macroscopic objects, shells, to build their world. But today, the science reports show we have moved far beyond shells. We are manipulating the foundational building blocks of matter itself.
And the results are borderline science fiction.
Let's look at what is happening at Stanford University. They've developed a new class of materials called smart Perovskite crystals. And the property making headlines is called photostriction.
Right.
When you hit these solid crystals with light, they literally bend, flex, and snap back.
To understand photostriction, you have to look at the photoelectric effect. Perovskites have a very specific, flexible crystal lattice structure.
Okay.
When photons, particles of light, strike the crystal, they transfer their energy to the electrons inside the material.
So the light excites the electron.
Exactly. This sudden excitation alters the electrical charge distribution within the lattice, which causes the atomic bonds to physically lengthen or contract. The material actually deforms.
So you are translating light directly into mechanical movement, bypassing electricity entirely.
The applications for this are immense. You could engineer microscopic light-driven motors for nanotechnology or design solar panels that physically track the sun's movement without any hinges or electrical servos.
It is programmable matter.
Programmable matter is the perfect phrase.
And it leads us directly into the massive medical breakthrough of the day. DNA robots.
This is wild.
They're talking about programmable molecular machines that use DNA to hunt viruses inside the human bloodstream. I need to understand the mechanics of this because it sounds impossible. How do you build a robot out of DNA?
It relies on a technique called DNA origami. We usually think of DNA as just a biological blueprint, right? A string of genetic code.
Yeah, exactly.
But structurally, it is just a polymer. And its components, the base pairs, adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine, they bind to each other with absolute predictable mathematical certainty. A only binds with T, C only binds with G.
Okay.
So by carefully sequencing synthetic strands of DNA, scientists can force them to fold in on themselves, self-assembling into complex three-dimensional geometric shapes.
So they essentially built a microscopic container. The
Yeah.
reports called it a clamshell.
Exactly. They engineer a DNA clamshell and load the interior with a payload, perhaps a highly toxic chemotherapy drug or an antiviral agent.
Right.
But the genius is the locking mechanism. The clamshell is sealed shut using an aptamer.
What's an aptamer?
It's a specialized sequence of DNA designed to act as a chemical lock. It will only open if it comes into physical contact with a very specific protein signature, say the spike protein of a virus or the surface antigen of a cancer cell.
Let me make sure I'm getting this. You inject millions of these closed clamshells into a patient. They float through the bloodstream, completely harmless to the healthy tissue because the toxic payload is locked inside.
Yeah.
But the moment the aptamer bumps into a cancer cell, the chemical key turns, the clamshell springs open, and it drops the bomb directly onto the disease.
It is the ultimate realization of targeted medicine. You eliminate the systemic toxicity of traditional chemotherapy, which poisons the whole body, and you replace it with molecular precision.
It is awe-inspiring. And that precision isn't limited to biology either. Let's look at physics. We all know what a laser is, a highly concentrated, coherent beam of photons or light. But researchers have just developed a phonon laser. It uses sound waves instead of light to measure gravity. How does a particle of sound measure the gravitational pull of the Earth?
This dips into the realm of quantum acoustics. A phonon is a quantized mode of vibrations occurring in a rigid crystal lattice. You can think of it as a particle of sound or heat.
A particle of sound. Okay.
Just as a traditional laser traps light between mirrors to amplify it into a coherent beam, a phonon laser traps mechanical vibrations. It amplifies them until they form a highly coherent acoustic wave.
And because it's a physical vibration, it reacts differently to the environment than light does.
Exactly. Photons are massless, but sound requires a physical medium to travel through. Therefore, a coherent phonon beam is incredibly sensitive to the physical properties of the system it exists in, including its mass and density.
Okay, that makes sense.
By creating a Bose-Einstein condensate of sound and measuring the minute subatomic shifts in its frequency, scientists can detect gravitational fluctuations with unprecedented accuracy.
What are the practical applications of that? Like, why measure gravity that closely?
It could revolutionize resource mapping. You could fly a phonon laser sensor over a landscape and detect deep subterranean water aquifers, oil reserves, or dense mineral deposits purely by mapping the tiny variations in the gravitational field below.
That's insane. Okay, so let's pause and synthesize this. We are programming human DNA to hunt cancer. We're using quantum sound to measure gravity. But then I look at the consumer tech sector, specifically the massive boom in artificial intelligence. And it feels less like a lab of geniuses and more like a chaotic, speculative casino.
The disparity between the rigor of our material science and the volatility of our digital economy is really jarring today.
Let's look at the winners and losers. On the victory side, we have a startup called Cognichip. They just raised $60 million to develop what they call artificial chip intelligence, or ACI.
Right.
Their pitch is that they are using AI neural networks to design the physical architecture of the silicon semiconductors that run AI models. They claim this can cut hardware design costs by 75%.
It is an Ouroboros the snake eating its own tail. Chip design is one of the most complex, labor-intensive engineering tasks on Earth. It requires billions of calculations to route microscopic circuits to prevent thermal overload and latency.
It's incredibly tedious.
If an AI can optimize its own physical hardware architecture faster and more efficiently than human engineers, the pace of computational acceleration will go vertical. It removes the human bottleneck from hardware evolution.
But the tech landscape is littered with bodies today, too.
Yeah.
Right alongside that success, we have Yup.A, an AI startup backed by $33 million from Andreessen Horowitz, one of the most prestigious venture capital firms in the world.
Yeah.
They just abruptly shut down, returning whatever capital was left. And even bigger, Rec Room, a massive virtual reality gaming platform that was once valued at $3.5 billion, is closing its doors.
It is the brutal reality of the venture capital power law. Immense capital injection does not organically generate a sustainable consumer market.
You can't just buy users.
Exactly. We are in a phase of aggressive, expensive experimentation. The underlying technology of VR and generative AI is undeniably powerful, but finding the killer app that actually retains user engagement and generates profit is incredibly difficult.
A $3.5 billion valuation vanishing overnight.
It proves that the tech economy is highly speculative, driven heavily by momentum and sentiment rather than actual utility right now.
And the cost of that speculation isn't just financial. There is a deep psychological toll being levied, particularly on the younger generation. The reports are raising massive alarms over a phenomenon experts are calling AI slop.
AI slop refers to the hyperabundant, mass-produced, low-quality synthetic content that is currently flooding social media platforms.
It's everywhere.
It's algorithmically generated video and text designed purely to trigger rapid engagement, often completely devoid of logic, narrative, or human intent.
And pediatric neurobiologists are warning that constant exposure to this synthetic junk is actively hindering cognitive development in children. We are seeing degradation in critical thinking and social-emotional processing.
It is a direct attack on the developing prefrontal cortex.
How does it damage the brain exactly?
Well, the human brain, particularly in childhood, relies on cause and effect narrative structures, human facial cues, and sustained attention to build neural pathways.
Right.
AI slop bypasses complex cognition and directly stimulates the dopamine system with rapid, nonsensical visual and auditory changes. It trains the brain to expect instant gratification while increasing cognitive load to the point of exhaustion.
It's exhausting them.
If a child's primary interactive environment is algorithmically optimized for addiction rather than comprehension, their ability to process complex reality is severely stunted.
So wait, the mechanism here is that the algorithm is literally altering the physical wiring of a child's brain just for the sake of ad revenue? We have the sheer genius to build a DNA clamshell that cures cancer, but we actively allow a digital ecosystem to melt our kids' attention spans. That is an astonishing ethical blind spot.
It is a profound misalignment of incentives. The DNA robot is engineered to solve a biological problem. Its success metric is the health of the patient. The AI content algorithm is engineered to capture human attention. Its success metric is time on screen, which dictates advertising revenue.
Right, it's just about the money.
In the cold calculus of the digital market, the neurological damage to the user is just an unpriced externality.
An unpriced externality. Just like the space debris we talked about, we keep building things without accounting for the collateral damage. And this irrational behavior bleeds right into our physical healthcare system. The coverage today highlighted a glaring contradiction in modern medicine.
The contrast between our embrace of high-tech interventions and our complete rejection of basic preventive health.
Exactly. Let's look at the tech side first. We have an incredible breakthrough in diagnostics. A new same-day UTI antibiotic susceptibility test.
That's huge.
Instead of a doctor prescribing a broad-spectrum antibiotic and waiting 3 days for a lab culture to see if it works, this rapid phenotypic testing analyzes the bacteria's response immediately. The doctor knows exactly which drug will kill the infection on day one.
Incredible.
And over in England, the National Health Service, the NHS, is rolling out weight loss jabs, GLP-1 agonists, to over 1 million people, specifically targeting those at high risk to prevent heart attacks and strokes.
These are highly advanced, highly expensive, biologically complex interventions. They represent the absolute pinnacle of targeted pharmaceutical science.
But parallel to this, public health data shows that Americans vastly underutilize something that costs mere pennies: salt substitutes.
It's so frustrating.
And the data shows this simple dietary switch effectively lowers blood pressure and prevents the exact same heart attacks the NHS is spending millions to treat.
To understand this, you have to look at the sodium-potassium pump inside human cells. High sodium intake from regular table salt pulls water into the bloodstream, increasing blood volume and placing immense mechanical stress on the vascular system.
Which is hypertension.
Exactly. Salt substitutes simply replace a portion of the sodium chloride with potassium chloride. Potassium actually relaxes the blood vessel walls and helps the kidneys excrete excess sodium. It is a fundamental, elegant biological fix.
So why do we ignore it? Why do we demand the advanced diagnostic test or the expensive weight loss injection, but we won't swap out the shaker on our kitchen table?
It comes down to the psychology of behavioral economics. Humans overwhelmingly prefer technological silver bullets that require zero effort over preventive, lifestyle-based changes that require discipline.
We want the easy way out.
Always. Furthermore, there's very little corporate profit margin in generic potassium chloride. Therefore, it lacks the billion-dollar marketing apparatus that accompanies a new pharmaceutical drug. We are a species that is technologically brilliant, yet behaviorally irrational.
Technologically brilliant, behaviorally irrational. That is the defining diagnosis of our time. And this imbalance, this mixture of high-tech capability and unresolved human flaws, isn't just a Silicon Valley problem. It is currently dictating the fate of the globe. Which brings us to the geopolitical reality unfolding today.
This is where the abstract concepts of risk, human behavior, and resource dependency manifest into violent, world-altering consequences.
I want to be very clear with you as we dive into this. The situation on the ground is highly volatile, the reporting is moving incredibly fast, and the perspectives are deeply polarized. We're going to look at the U.S.-Israel-Iran war impartially, laying out the facts of the conflict and the opposing viewpoints shaping the global response.
It is crucial to examine the architecture of this conflict objectively, because the implications extend far beyond the borders of the Middle East.
Today marks the 33rd day of an escalating regional war. The geography of the conflict is expanding rapidly. The reports state that Israel has escalated its airstrikes deep into areas of Lebanon that are historically not controlled by Hezbollah, targeting broader infrastructure.
Right.
Additionally, human rights organizations are alleging the use of white phosphorus munitions by Israeli forces in southern Lebanon.
White phosphorus is a highly controversial incendiary weapon. From a chemical standpoint, it is pyrophoric, meaning it ignites spontaneously upon contact with oxygen and burns at over 800 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, it's horrifying.
While military legally use it to create dense smoke screens for troop movement, its deployment in populated areas is heavily criticized because the chemical burns are catastrophic and incredibly difficult to treat.
And the internal political situation in Lebanon is also fracturing under the pressure. The Lebanese government recently declared Iran's ambassador, Mohammad Reza Shaybani, persona non grata, essentially ordering him to leave the country. But Hezbollah, the powerful political and militant faction within Lebanon, is actively backing him, so he remains. It is a vivid display of a sovereign state losing control of its own internal diplomacy.
It demonstrates the deep entrenchment of Iranian influence within Lebanese institutions. And within Iran itself, the operational tempo of the war is devastating.
Yes, the coverage states that daily airstrikes are hitting non-military targets across Iran, crippling basic infrastructure. In retaliation, Iran's Revolutionary Guards are utilizing a very specific doctrine.
They are.
They aren't just targeting military bases. They have issued direct public threats against major U.S. technology companies, Apple, Google, Meta, warning them to anticipate retaliation for the assassination of Iranian leaders.
This is the absolute textbook definition of asymmetric warfare. The Iranian military command understands it cannot achieve parity with the conventional air and naval superiority of the United States or Israel.
So they hit them where they're vulnerable.
Therefore, they fight asymmetrically. They utilize proxy militias to bleed their adversaries. They engage in sophisticated cyber warfare. And now they are explicitly threatening the corporate infrastructure that drives the American economy.
Right.
Targeting the digital backbone of Apple or Google is an attempt to inflict maximum economic and psychological disruption without engaging a U.S. carrier strike group directly.
But the conventional threats are escalating too. Analysts are sounding the alarm that this 33-day conflict could shatter the non-proliferation consensus and spur a regional nuclear arms race. The reports note that Saudi Arabia and Turkey are actively reassessing their security postures, potentially seeking nuclear weapons for deterrence.
In international relations, this is known as nuclear latency and the security dilemma.
The security dilemma, okay.
When a nation looks at a neighboring conflict and realizes that conventional military strength or alliances might not be enough to guarantee its survival against an existential threat, the calculus shifts. If Iran is perceived to be accelerating its nuclear capabilities under the cover of war, regional powers like Saudi Arabia will inevitably pursue their own deterrent to maintain the balance of power. It is a terrifying domino effect.
And speaking of domino effects, the immediate shockwave hitting every single listener today is economic. The price of oil is skyrocketing. U.S. gas prices have broken the $4 a gallon mark, the highest we've seen since 2022.
It's hitting everyone.
Russia, capitalizing on the chaos, has instituted a total ban on domestic gasoline exports to protect its own markets. An energy expert from the University of Oslo issued a stark warning that the European Union is facing the largest oil supply disruption in history.
And the epicenter of this economic earthquake is the Strait of Hormuz.
Right. Let's look at the geography there. It is a remarkably narrow waterway between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. The United Arab Emirates, the UAE, is reportedly pushing to force this strait open, stating they are willing to join the fight to secure it. Why is this specific strip of water causing a global meltdown?
Because it is the geopolitical jugular vein of the global energy market, roughly 1/5 of the world's total daily oil consumption passes through that single narrow choke point on massive supertankers.
1/5?
If the Strait of Hormuz is mined, blockaded, or even credibly threatened by drone strikes, that supply is instantly removed from the global market.
Which cascades into absolutely everything. The coverage explicitly noted that the Bank of England issued a warning that this Iran war shock could push up mortgages for 1.3 million homeowners in the UK.
Yes.
So the mechanism here is an oil tanker can't leave the Persian Gulf, and a family in London loses their house. Walk me through that macroeconomic cascade, because it sounds crazy.
It's a brutal chain reaction. When the global supply of oil shrinks, the price of a barrel spikes. Because oil is the foundational energy source for the entire physical economy, the cost to manufacture goods, harvest food, and transport cargo immediately increases.
So everything gets more expensive?
This creates rampant global inflation. Central banks, like the Bank of England or the U.S. Federal Reserve, only have one primary tool to fight inflation. They raise interest rates to cool down the economy.
Right.
When central bank interest rates go up, retail borrowing costs soar. Therefore, a homeowner with an adjustable rate mortgage suddenly sees their monthly payment skyrocketed. The interconnected nature of global finance means a geopolitical crisis thousands of miles away directly drains the bank account of an average citizen.
It is all tethered together. Now, politically, the global response to this crisis is deeply divided, and we need to look at the opposing frameworks. In the United States, President Donald Trump's administration is facing intense pressure from regional allies to escalate.
Yes, the reports indicate that right-leaning perspectives, defense hawks, and regional Gulf allies view this moment as a necessary crucible. Their argument is rooted in the doctrine of deterrence. From this viewpoint, Iran has spent decades operating as a destabilizing force, funding proxy militias, and pursuing hegemony. They argue that overwhelming decisive military strength is the only language that effectively neutralizes Iranian aggression, and that securing long-term peace in the Middle East requires dismantling their military apparatus entirely.
So the idea is that backing down now projects weakness.
Exactly. Backing down, in their view, would invite future attacks.
Conversely, European nations and left-leaning perspectives are aggressively pushing back against the military campaign.
Their framework is rooted in humanitarian preservation and conflict de-escalation. From this perspective, the human toll of the war, the massive civilian casualties, the displacement of populations in Lebanon, the destruction of infrastructure is an unacceptable moral failure.
And they look at historical precedents, right?
They point out that overwhelming military intervention in the Middle East consistently yields catastrophic blowback, creating power vacuums and further radicalization. Their stance is that immediate diplomatic ceasefires and negotiated settlements are the only sustainable path to security.
And navigating this divide, President Trump's rhetoric has been incredibly volatile. He has oscillated wildly in his public statements. In one breath, he predicts a swift diplomatic end to the war, suggesting it could be over in 2 weeks, maybe 3.
Yeah.
In the next, he threatens massive unilateral airstrikes on Iran's energy infrastructure. And when European allies expressed reluctance to join an expanded military operation, he launched a public tirade telling Europe to get your own oil.
It creates a highly unpredictable diplomatic environment, which severely complicates alliance coordination, and global competitors are keenly observing this friction.
Absolutely. The reports note that China openly mocked a recent joint statement issued by the G7 regarding the war. A Chinese spokesperson dismissed it as a document of studied emptiness.
That is calculated diplomatic theater. China is signaling to the global south that the traditional Western consensus the alliance structures built post-World War II is fracturing under the pressure of its own internal contradictions. They are positioning themselves as an alternative, stable, diplomatic pole.
And while the superpowers maneuver, the localized human cost continues to mount. Far from the front lines, a massive petrochemical plant exploded in Russia with suspected Ukrainian involvement, proving that global energy infrastructure is universally vulnerable right now.
It's all exposed.
And tragically, an American journalist, Shelley Kittleson, an award-winning reporter who spent years covering ISIS, has been kidnapped in Baghdad, Iraq.
Her kidnapping underscores the localized anarchy that these vast geopolitical shifts create. When regional stability collapses, the physical environment becomes incredibly hostile for those attempting to document the truth on the ground.
It is a dark, heavy reality. But this global struggle for resources and power, whether it is the oil in the Middle East or the minerals required for the future, is forcing nations to fundamentally alter their economies and their societies. This leads us to the final massive shifts happening in the background of this war.
Because when the world attention is consumed by a major conflict, profound structural and legal changes often occur quietly in the periphery.
Let's look at the quiet resource war happening in Africa. The coverage highlights aggressive economic maneuvering in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the DR Congo. A major Australian mining firm, AVZ Minerals, recently had its operational permits completely revoked by the local government.
Right.
And moving immediately into that vacuum is China, rapidly gaining ground in the mining sector.
To understand the stakes here, you have to look at what the DR Congo holds.
Oh.
It possesses the world's vastest reserves of cobalt and incredibly rich copper deposits. These elements are the non-negotiable chemical foundation for lithium-ion batteries, which power electric vehicles and renewable energy grids.
So while the West is embroiled in a war over oil, the energy of the past century China is actively securing vertical integration over the energy of the next century.
Precisely. It is a masterclass in Belt and Road resource diplomacy. By controlling the raw extraction of cobalt in Africa, China dictates the global supply chain for the impending green energy transition. It is a long-term economic checkmate.
And the irony of that green energy transition is on full display in South America today. In Santa Marta, Colombia, representatives from 46 nations are meeting for a climate summit specifically to discuss a global phase-out of fossil fuels. And sitting at the table are major fossil fuel giants like Canada, Australia, and Brazil.
It is an incredible paradox. You have nations simultaneously fighting a proxy war over the flow of oil in the Middle East while sending diplomats to Colombia to draft treaties on how to stop burning it.
Make it make sense.
It's tough, and the friction at the summit is palpable. Norway, for example, is heavily advocating that their specific low-emission oil production methods should exempt them from total phase-outs. It highlights the immense, almost insurmountable difficulty of weaning the global economy off a resource it relies on for basic survival.
And while politicians debate treaties, the physical climate is violently asserting itself. The reports are tracking a massive Saharan dust storm, known as the Harmattan, sweeping across Morocco. It is so dense it is turning the sky a vivid orange, and the sheer scale of the atmospheric disturbance is being tracked by NASA satellites.
The Harmattan is a natural trade wind, but the intensity of these events carries profound implications. From a meteorological standpoint, millions of tons of silica and dust are lifted into the upper atmosphere. This severely impacts public health and aviation across North Africa and Southern Europe.
Right.
But paradoxically, this dust is carried across the Atlantic Ocean, where the phosphorus and iron contained within it literally fertilize the Amazon rainforest. The Earth's systems are interconnected on a scale that completely ignores our political boundaries.
Which brings us back to those political boundaries and the profound legal shifts happening inside them. Let's look at the United States, where the Supreme Court is currently navigating foundational, highly polarizing legal battles.
These are massive cases.
First, they are hearing oral arguments regarding a direct challenge to birthright citizenship, a case heavily pushed by the Trump administration.
This touches the very bedrock of American constitutional law. Birthright citizenship is enshrined in the 14th Amendment under the principle of jus soli, the right of the soil. It dictates that any person born within the territorial jurisdiction of the United States is automatically a citizen, regardless of their parents' immigration status. The administration's push to alter, restrict, or radically reinterpret this principle would strip legal standing from millions of individuals and fundamentally rewrite the social contract of American immigration.
And the court took the case.
The fact that the Supreme Court granted certiorari agreeing to hear the case indicates a willingness to examine deeply entrenched legal precedents.
The second major Supreme Court case is equally consequential regarding civil rights. The court recently ruled against a state ban on LGBTQ+ conversion therapy for minors.
This case represents a profound clash of legal rights. On one side, you have the state's police power, the authority to regulate medical and psychological practices to protect the welfare of minors, guided by medical professionals who state conversion therapy is fundamentally harmful.
And on the other side,
you have the constitutional assertion of parental rights and religious liberty, the argument that parents possess the fundamental authority to direct the upbringing and medical care of their children according to their beliefs.
so what does the ruling mean?
By ruling against the ban, the court explicitly prioritized parental authority over state intervention. establishing a precedent that will undoubtedly reshape future legislative battles over pediatric healthcare and civil rights.
And the executive branch is facing its own intense legal scrutiny. A federal judge just temporarily blocked President Trump's massive $400 million construction project to build a new White House ballroom, which would require demolishing parts of the historic East Wing.
The legal reasoning of the judge is what is fascinating here. The ruling explicitly states that the president is a steward of the White House, not an owner.
A steward. That's a very specific word.
Yes. It legally frames the executive residence as a monument belonging to the public trust. Therefore, the president cannot unilaterally alter its historical architecture without the consent and funding approval of the legislative branch. It is a classic separation of powers conflict playing out over physical architecture.
At the exact same time, Trump signed an executive order attempting to create a national voter list, which immediately triggered lawsuits from voting rights advocates, arguing he lacks the constitutional authority to mandate federal election registries.
Again, we are seeing the boundaries of executive privilege being actively tested against the structural limits of the Constitution.
And this wave of societal shifting isn't isolated to America. Internationally, the reports highlight a surge in restrictive social legislation. In Senegal, the president officially signed a highly controversial law that dramatically doubles the maximum jail term for same-sex relations.
Yeah.
And in Finland, a member of parliament, Päivi Räsänen, was criminally convicted and fined for a 2004 pamphlet that the court ruled was legally insulting to homosexuals.
When you synthesize all of this, the Supreme Court redefining citizenship and civil rights, executive orders testing the limits of power, and international governments enforcing strict ideological codes, a clear pattern emerges.
What's the pattern?
We are witnessing a world in deep ideological flux. Governments are actively utilizing periods of extreme global stress, the distraction of the oil crisis and the Middle East war, to consolidate power and push through profound, often polarizing cultural shifts.
Wow.
The foundational rules regarding who holds power, who controls the resources, and who is granted basic rights are being aggressively rewritten on a global scale.
It honestly feels like we are watching a real-time stress test of human civilization. We have a judge legally defining the limits of a sitting president's power. We have the Supreme Court dissecting the definition of a citizen. We have superpowers hoarding cobalt in Africa while banning gas exports in Europe. Are these stress fractures proof that the global system is finally breaking down? Or is this just the agonizingly messy reality of the system adapting?
I would argue it is the violent friction of adaptation. A stress test always reveals critical vulnerabilities, but the very fact that the courts are actively litigating these boundaries, that climate summits are still convening despite the wars, demonstrates that the architecture of global governance, however strained, is still attempting to function.
It's bending but not breaking.
The existential question is whether our institutions can adapt fast enough to handle the sheer exponential velocity of the technological and geopolitical changes we are throwing at them.
Velocity is the absolute perfect word for it. Let's take a collective breath and recap the immense journey we've just taken in this deep dive.
It's been a ride.
We started by looking up. We watched the astronauts of Artemis II preparing to float in the absolute silence of translunar orbit, looking down at a blue marble that is currently beset by a brutal war over ancient energy reserves.
Yep.
We zoomed in, past the surface of the skin, down to the molecular level, where robots constructed from folded human DNA are swimming through our veins, programmed to hunt disease with mathematical precision.
The contrast is just amazing.
And then we zoomed out to confront the chaotic reality of human behavior, where we engineer brilliant artificial intelligence that inadvertently degrades our children's neurobiology, where we ignore cheap, life-saving dietary fixes in favor of expensive injections, and where superpowers are locked in a high-stakes geopolitical chess match that is rewriting the borders of the Middle East and the economic stability of the entire world.
We have mapped the vast extremes of human capability today, the brilliance of our science and the immense, sometimes tragic depth of our flaws.
It is a massive amount of intelligence to process. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to hand the floor over to you for final thought. We've explored the origins of the solar system, the microverse, and the battlefields of today. Give us something to think about regarding our ultimate legacy.
Let's think back to that ancient island in the Fiji archipelago we discussed earlier, an entire landmass, engineered piece by piece out of discarded seashells by a culture over 1,200 years ago. It stands today as a physical monument. It tells us exactly how those humans lived, what they consumed, and how they intelligently managed their environment to create something lasting and stable.
Okay.
Now, project that concept deeply into the future. Imagine an archaeologist from the year 3226 unearthing the geological strata of our current civilization. They will find the microscopic crystalline remnants of our DNA robots. They will find the carbon scoring of our ballistic missiles, the shrapnel of our drones, and the radioactive signatures of our energy choices.
Yeah.
And they will look up into the night sky and see the metallic rings of our satellites, perhaps still decaying and colliding in orbit.
What will they think?
Exactly. What will be the overarching monument we leave behind? When they read the archaeological record of April 2026, will they conclude that we were the generation that mastered our own biology and successfully conquered the stars? Or will they determine that we were a generation of brilliant engineers who simply lost our way in the dust of our own terrestrial conflicts?
Are we the generation that conquered the stars, or the one that lost its way in the dust? That is a profoundly haunting question to leave hanging in the air. Thank you, as always, to you, the listener, for taking this deep dive with us today, for bringing your sustained curiosity to the heaviest geopolitical realities and the most awe-inspiring scientific breakthroughs of our time. The world is complex, it is undeniably messy, but it is never, ever boring. Stay insanely curious, keep asking the hard questions, and we'll be right here to help you unpack the reality of it all next time.
For enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
Welcome to the debate. Right now, a fifth of the world's oil is just, well, trapped. It is sitting behind a military blockade in the Strait of Hormuz.
Right, and we are now on day 33 of what is really an unprecedented conflict involving the U.S., Israel, and Iran.
Yeah, and the ripple effects are just tearing through the global economy. I mean, gas in the U.S. has crossed $4 a gallon, but honestly, that is just a surface metric.
Exactly. Beneath that surface, we are watching a fundamental geopolitical realignment. It stretches from the European Union to the Gulf states, Latin America, and Asia.
And it is accompanied by extreme market volatility, which brings us to our core question today. I argue that this current crisis, while undeniably severe, is acting as a forced systemic restructuring.
And I take a very different view. I argue that this conflict exposes a deeply brittle, hyperdependent global system.
But I see it as a necessary catalyst, It is actively pushing the planet away from U.S. unilateral hegemony and our collective fossil fuel addiction. It is moving us toward a resilient, multipolar, and clean energy future.
I hear that, but the staggering inflation and geopolitical fragmentation we're witnessing demonstrate a systemic failure. This isn't ushering in a clean transition. It is inflicting long-term, structural damage on the global economy.
Well, let's start by looking at the actual mechanics of this systemic restructuring, because historically, humanity doesn't just abandon a primary energy source because it is the right thing to do.
Right, we only abandon it when we are economically forced to.
Exactly. And the massive disruption to the Strait of Hormuz is acting as this global forced fast from our fossil fuel addiction. I mean, look at the 46-nation summit taking place right now in Santa Marta, Colombia.
Which is a significant gathering, sure.
Very significant. It includes major oil producers, Canada, Australia, Brazil, Norway, and they are actively mapping out a fossil fuel phase-out.
Right, but
the shock of this war fundamentally changes the economic calculus. When relying on Middle Eastern oil means your entire economy is subject to sudden, violent disruption, nations realize something crucial.
that they need their own energy?
Exactly. Clean energy self-sufficiency isn't just an environmental goal anymore. It is the ultimate national security imperative.
I come at it from a different way, though. A forced fast implies that the patient actually has the fat reserves to survive the starvation period, right?
Well, yes, to an extent.
For much of the planet, the kind of rapid transition you are talking about is a luxury they simply cannot afford. You mentioned the summit in Colombia, but let's look at the mechanism of how this oil shock is actually playing out in the developing world right now.
Okay, sure.
Take the African continent. Multiple African nations are currently facing this crippling $30 billion annual penalty just for petroleum imports.
Because of the lack of domestic refining infrastructure.
Yes, exactly. They extract crude, but they lack the refineries, so they have to export crude and buy back refined diesel and gasoline.
Right, which creates a massive premium.
A huge one. When the Strait of Hormuz closes, the premium on refined products skyrockets. That $30 billion is capital completely drained from their economies. Capital that could have been used to build the very solar or hydrogen infrastructure you were talking about.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. If we don't experience a severe supply shock like the one currently blocking 20% of the world's oil, what actual financial incentive does the global market have to rapidly scale those renewable investments?
But the capital drain is just...
Yes, the capital drain on developing nations right now is immense. But structurally, nations that import finished fuels are trapped in a perpetual cycle of dependency anyway. A shock of this magnitude breaks the inertia.
It assumes the capital goes to renewables, though.
It forces global capital from the World Bank, from private equity, to flow into domestic renewable infrastructure. The alternative risk model is just unacceptable now. It forces a complete rewrite of how we price energy security.
But you are assuming the capital will flow to renewables rather than just scrambling to secure existing fossil fuel lifelines at higher prices. Look at the severe impacts on the global working class today.
I mean, transitions are always messy.
Messy is an understatement. In the Gulf, you have Asian migrant workers from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh who are trapped. They are weighing the deadly, physical risk of working in a potential war zone.
Because of the remittances?
Exactly. The money they send home is the only thing keeping their families afloat. And look at Senegal. Transport strikes initiated by road transport unions are completely paralyzing traffic in Dakar.
Due to fuel costs?
Right. Drivers simply cannot afford the fuel to operate their vehicles. When you tell a Senegalese taxi driver or a trapped migrant worker that this is a necessary fast to break global inertia, you are ignoring the profound structural economic damage happening right now.
I wouldn't say I'm ignoring it, but
You cannot transition an economy that is currently suffocating. The International Monetary Fund is warning that the UK is facing its worst economic shock in decades, potentially hiking mortgages for 1.3 million homeowners. This inflation destroys the middle and working classes globally.
look, for anyone listening who might be wondering how a transport strike in Senegal or a mortgage hike in the UK connects to a summit in Colombia, this is exactly the friction of transition. The global economy is currently wired to a central hub, and that hub is breaking.
Breaking very violently.
Yes, which leads us to the geopolitical side of this. We are seeing a massive shift away from U.S. unipolarity. For 50 years, the U.S. has essentially acted as the global bouncer, right?
Right. Underwriting maritime security.
Exactly, which allowed other nations, particularly in Europe, to underinvest in their own defense and diplomacy. But now, with the erratic rhetoric from the U.S. administration essentially telling Europe to go get your own oil, we are seeing healthy independence emerge.
Healthy independence?
Yes! French President Emmanuel Macron is in Japan, touting European predictability as a contrast to Washington. The UK's Keir Starmer is seeking closer defense ties with the EU. This is the messy, painful birth of a multipolar world where regions take responsibility for their own security.
It is incredibly dangerous to mistake a power vacuum for a healthy multipolar world.
How so?
Well, in a functional multipolar system, you have a balance of power, you have established rules, and predictable alliances. What we are seeing right now is not balance. It is fragmentation.
But that fragmentation is temporary.
When the global bouncer, as you put it, suddenly leaves the room erratically, the result isn't that everyone peacefully hires their own security. The result is a bar fight. The actors stepping into the vacuum left by the U.S. are doing so through military escalation.
But aren't they just stabilizing their own neighborhoods? I mean, if you look at the Gulf states...
They aren't stabilizing. They are panicking. The United Arab Emirates is privately urging the U.S. to decisively defeat Iran. They are pushing for a UN Security Council resolution to use overwhelming force to secure the waterway.
Right, to protect their maritime routes.
Meanwhile, Russia is aggressively stepping up its Middle East diplomacy, with Vladimir Putin calling Gulf leaders to exploit the friction between Washington and its traditional allies. And China is capitalizing on the chaos by deploying its navy to the Sea of Japan.
Because Tokyo is deploying long-range missiles.
Exactly. This isn't regions taking mature responsibility for their security. This is a desperate scramble for survival. Regional powers are using maximum force because the overarching security architecture has collapsed without a viable replacement.
That is an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. Think about this as an architectural retrofit of a massive, outdated building.
Okay.
Taking out the primary load-bearing pillar, in this case, U.S. security guarantees in the Middle East, is going to cause the building to groan. The plaster is going to crack.
The plaster is definitely cracking.
But the Gulf states, like the UAE, are just acting as rational, self-interested actors, trying to install new support beams. I mean, they just lost $120 billion in market value across the Dubai and Abu Dhabi stock exchanges because of this conflict.
Which is a staggering loss.
Right. So they aren't signaling a global collapse. They are using every available diplomatic and military lever to protect their economies. We are finally seeing regional powers use their own capital and leverage to force stability, rather than just waiting for Washington to solve it.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why.
Sure.
When you lose $120 billion in market value almost overnight because thousands of Iranian missiles and drones have targeted your infrastructure, your response is not a calculated architectural retrofit.
You think it's just panic?
Your response is absolute panic. It is a demand for overwhelming violence to neutralize an existential threat. And we are seeing that violence play out. Israel is intensifying its attacks, striking non-military targets like Iranian steel mills and pharmaceutical plants.
Which is devastating, yes.
This isn't just war. This is the physical dismantling of a nation's ability to function. How can you build a stable multipolar order when the foundational strategy has become the total economic annihilation of your regional rivals?
But if we look at how global capital is reacting, the financial markets seem to fundamentally disagree with your assessment of total annihilation. Let's look at the market volatility and what I actually see as global financial resilience.
Resilience? Where are you seeing that?
Recently, we saw the Dow surge 1,000 points. The S&P 500 and NASDAQ saw substantial increases. And why did that happen? Because the Iranian president offered mere hints about a willingness to negotiate.
Mere hints, yes.
And the market immediately priced in a de-escalation. To me, this shows the underlying optimism and resilience of the global economy. The capital isn't fleeing into bunkers. It is sitting on the sidelines, ready to deploy the absolute second diplomacy prevails.
I think you're misreading the market completely.
The markets are signaling that the global economy is coiled like a spring, ready to bounce back.
A 1,000-point surge on a rumor is not resilience, it is a casino mentality. You have traders making algorithmic bets based purely on political theater. It is completely disconnected from the reality on the ground.
But it reflects expectations.
Financial analysts have explicitly pointed to the primary driver of this rally, which they have dubbed the taco effect, meaning Trump always chickens out.
The taco effect. Okay, let's unpack that. Even if we assume traders are just betting on political theater, doesn't that still prove my point about the system's resilience?
No, it proves its extreme fragility. The market isn't betting on a sustainable structural diplomatic resolution. It is betting that the U.S. administration will back down from its maximalist demands the moment the economic pain becomes a political liability domestically.
Which is a predictable mechanism.
But that means global capital, trillions of dollars, is hinging entirely on the unpredictable psychology of a single political leader's fear of poor polling numbers, rather than on any actual structural stability in the Middle East. That is a terrifyingly brittle foundation for a global economy.
If the market believes that political leaders will ultimately avoid catastrophic economic damage,
If they avoid it, yes.
if they believe that $4 gas, collapsing supply chains, and a torpedoed housing market will eventually force a diplomatic off-ramp, then the system is functioning. It is self-correcting.
I wouldn't call it self-correcting.
The market rallies because it understands that no rational actor, not the U.S., not Iran, not the Gulf states, benefits from a global economic depression. The circuit breakers will trip before the system burns down.
You are confusing financial speculation with physical reality. While Wall Street algorithms rally on the possibility of a political backtrack, actual physical infrastructure is being permanently destroyed.
Infrastructure damage is a reality of war, yes.
But we are seeing a terrifying strategy of what experts are calling ecological terror emerging. There are severe warnings in reports surrounding the targeting of desalination plants.
Right, the water supply.
They are turning water management into a weapon of war, in a region that is already devastated by climate change. If a major desalination plant is destroyed, a 1,000-point rally on the Dow does not provide drinking water to millions of people.
That is a fair point.
You cannot trade your way out of a destroyed water supply. The physical destruction of infrastructure inflicts deep, generational humanitarian and economic damage that a temporary stock market rally completely ignores.
I absolutely acknowledge the severity of the physical destruction. The targeting of critical infrastructure like desalination plants and pharmaceutical facilities is the most devastating aspect of this conflict.
It is structural damage.
But we must look at how the broader global system is responding to that threat. The European Union is now realizing it faces the largest oil supply disruption in history. Francesco Sassi, a prominent energy geopolitics expert, noted that this specific threat profile is forcing European policymakers to urgently diversify energy sources.
But look at how they are diversifying.
And look at the institutional responses. The UK and France are extending emergency talks over border security. Germany is ramping up weapons production to 24 hours a day to prepare for a war economy. These are massive, historically sluggish state apparatuses finally waking up from decades of complacency. They are finally building the capacity to manage their own regions.
Waking up from complacency by transitioning to a war economy is exactly what terrifies me. Germany ramping up weapons production 24/7 isn't a step toward a green multipolar utopia.
It is a step towards self-reliance.
It is the industrial preparation for a prolonged multi-front conflict, and we have to look at how this pressure fractures the very institutions you expect to lead this new world. Look at the domestic stability of the Western powers.
There are internal challenges, certainly.
In the U.S., you have the Supreme Court hearing deeply divisive cases on birthright citizenship and massive internal political fractures regarding the funding of public media and basic government services.
Right.
The UK Bank of England is warning of major cascading supply shocks. The domestic foundations of the powers that are supposed to anchor this new multipolar order are fracturing under the economic pressure of this conflict.
But, fracture is often a prerequisite for a necessary rebuild. The current global architecture, which relies on the U.S. acting as the sole security guarantor and the Middle East acting as the world's gas station, is fundamentally unsustainable.
I agree, it is unsustainable.
It was always going to fail. The conflict we are dissecting today is the crucible forcing the change. From the 46 nations meeting in Colombia to chart a concrete post-fossil fuel roadmap, to Europe finally unifying its defense posture.
Unified through militarization.
We are witnessing the painfully steep cost of forging a more independent and green global economy. The transition is undeniably harsh, especially on the developing world, but the alternative is remaining permanently vulnerable to exactly this kind of crisis.
And I maintain that the wounds being inflicted right now are simply too deep for the global body to recover from in any recognizable healthy way. We are watching the real-time destruction of vital supply chains, the rapid impoverishment of vulnerable populations from Africa to Southeast Asia, and the aggressive militarization of geopolitics.
It is a massive disruption.
From the looming threat of nuclear proliferation in Saudi Arabia and Turkey as they seek ultimate deterrence, to the horrifying use of water desalination as a weapon of war, this conflict is inflicting structural damage on planetary stability. It will take decades to heal if it ever does. The human and economic cost of this so-called restructuring is vastly higher than the benefits of the multipolar order you are envisioning.
We have covered immense ground today, dissecting the mechanisms driving one of the most volatile periods in modern history. And while our perspectives differ sharply on the ultimate outcome, whether this is a catalyst for renewal or a slide into fragmentation, there is a clear point of convergence between us.
Yes, there is.
We both agree that the current global architecture is undergoing a fundamental and irreversible transformation. The era of unquestioned U.S. unipolar security and the world's absolute reliance on Middle Eastern fossil fuels is over.
Absolutely. The status quo has been permanently shattered. The old system is dead. The question that remains is, what will actually materialize to replace it? A balanced, sustainable system driven by clean energy, or a fractured, militarized world fighting desperately over dwindling resources and shattered supply chains?
Exactly. And that is why viewing this conflict through multiple lenses is so essential. We have to understand the macro-systemic changes, like the flow of global capital into renewable energy transitions and massive diplomatic realignments.
Right.
But we cannot lose sight of the immediate localized economic mechanisms across the globe, from the $30 billion deficit crippling African fuel imports, to the UK homeowners facing severe mortgage hikes, to the algorithmic trading on Wall Street dictating reality. Everything is connected.
There is certainly much more to explore regarding how specific regions, from Latin America to the South China Sea, will adapt to these unfolding global shifts. The structural ramifications of day 33 of this conflict are going to dictate the economic and security realities of the next century.
So we leave it to you, the listener, to weigh the evidence. Are we watching a painful but necessary restructuring of an obsolete global system, clearing the way for a resilient, multipolar future? Or has the collapse of the old order already begun to inflict permanent structural damage on the planetary economy we all rely on? Thank you for joining us.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.